Hey, it's Merrick. If you weren't satisfied with my basic How the Web Works video, then here's a more in-depth version. In that previous video, I made a comparison between your computer making a request to YouTube server for some video content, to you walking over to your neighbor's house and asking for a DVD or Blu-ray. Now, in order for you to be able to do that, you need something that connects your house to his. So in our example, that would be the street. Without it, you wouldn't be able to go from your house to your neighbor's house. And just like how your street connects your house, not just to your neighbor's house, but if you think about it, basically every single house and apartment accessible by road in your continent, the internet allows you to connect to basically any website from your computer. Okay, so now that we have a path between your house and all these other houses, we need a process for you and all your neighbors to actually get to each other's houses so that you can exchange stuff. Some form of transportation. Let's say a bicycle. But there are no bicycles on the web. Instead, data is transported using something called TCP/IP, which stands for Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol. It defines how data gets sent and where it gets sent. So it says you will use your bicycle to get to your neighbor's house, exchange some stuff, and then use the bicycle to bring it back home. But wait, there's actually another step. You have a lot of neighbors and it wouldn't be easy to memorize which friend lives in which address. For example, you're not going to remember that YouTube lives in 17325 and Twitter lives at 32665 and Google is at 57621. What is easy though is remembering their names, YouTube, Twitter, and Google. So you know you want to talk to YouTube, but you can't remember his exact street number. Lucky for you, you have one more neighbor, a very special neighbor. And his name is DNS, which stands for Domain Name Server. And you know how to get to his house because he's your direct neighbor, he's right beside you. And what's special about him is that he's memorized every single one of your neighbor's addresses for you. So when you want to see any of your other neighbors, you just need to see him first to ask where they live. In your head, you know youtube.com is the website you're looking for, and that's something really easy for us humans to remember. But that's just a name, or domain name to be specific, not an address. For your computer to properly make a request to YouTube server, it needs to know that specific address for where it's making the request. Now, every computer and server has an address, just like a house. Your computer has one, YouTube server has one, and it's usually just a series of numbers or characters with periods or colons separating them. Something much harder to remember than a domain name. So when you type in youtube.com, your browser first sends a request to a DNS server, which is a directory of URLs like youtube.com, google.com, etc., and has those matched to their IP addresses. It's like the Contacts app in your phone. You always look up a name and then you can find out the address after. So you send the DNS server the name, like youtube.com, and the DNS server responds with the IP address of that server. And then your browser makes a second request to this IP address. This means you never really directly go from your browser to the website server. If you're typing in a domain name, you always go through a DNS first, which looks up the real address of the server. Okay, so what's HTTP? The thing that your browser always adds in front of a URL. Well, it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's the protocol for computers to make requests and responses to one another. In our street example, it would be like the language used to communicate, English for example. So that request your browser makes is actually an HTTP request, and the response is an HTTP response. And we'll get into the details of these requests and responses in a future video. You may have also seen HTTPS instead of just HTTP. This is just a more secure form of HTTP, which protects the communication between the browser and server from eavesdropping and tampering. So when you're dealing with sensitive information, like logins and passwords, you'll want to be using HTTPS. I'll be going over this more when the time comes. Alright, so now that we've covered the details, let's go over it one more time. You're on your computer, which we'll call the client because it's the more proper term for any device making a request. You type in youtube.com and hit enter. This makes an HTTP request to the DNS, the domain name server. The DNS server finds the actual IP address for youtube.com and sends it back to your browser. Your browser takes this IP address and makes another HTTP request to YouTube's server, which makes an HTTP response to that request by sending the requested files, web pages, and whatever else back to your browser. Your browser downloads all that data and then displays it to you. This is how the web works broken down into more detail. Now, we can break it down even further, but I'll actually be doing that as required in the videos within my main courses. I won't make any dedicated videos for each of these things as it can get pretty dry without any context. I hope you learned something from this video. Please give it a like and give me a subscribe if you want more content like this.